So in this video, I'm going to give you some tips for sewing together the cowl. But you end up with a triangle with some short sides, I guess. Now, when I sew seams in knitting, I always have my right sides out as opposed to sewing, and so that I can see what it's going to look like on the outside. In the pattern, I had to put a stitch marker that ends up, if you've got it all laid out, in the top right hand corner, and then I also had you do a stitch marker that's at the bottom. And so those are going to be the key to where you're going to line things up. And so at the top, you'll notice there's kind of a little square space here. And so you might think you're attaching here, but really you're going to be attaching from here, and you'll see when you pull this out, it pulls straight. So you won't really see it. So you're going to attach where your yarn, let me get this on camera, where your yarn is coming out. This is the tail from your bind off to where the stitch marker, removable stitch marker is. And then on the other end, you're going to take where you bind off your yarn and attach it where the stitch marker is. You can see a little bit, if I can lay this out for you, that you're looking to line up your seed stitch stripes, but in this particular yarn, you don't see the colors that much, so it really, so it's a little harder to match them up because you can't see them as well, but it also doesn't make any difference really in this yarn. So, so you just do your best. So a couple tips that I have for you are work with your tails first. This is, you've got a tail at the top and you've got a tail at the bottom. And the most important parts of seaming this, you want the top to look really good. You want that to match, and you want the bottom, if I get that on camera, you want that to match as well. So we're going to actually work this seam from both ends, which is going to make sure that they meet exactly. Because if you were to start at one end and work up, sometimes you get off a little bit, and then all of a sudden you've got all this gap to make up for. So we're just going to avoid that in the first place. So I'm going to take this one out and thread this through. And then I'm going to find the topmost point here and just go through that. And then I'm going to go back to this at the top and push it through just to really anchor that top and make sure that it looks as straight across as I can get it. The other thing about this cowl is you don't want a lot of seam allowance. If you're doing side seams on a sweater, it's going to be in the inside. Nobody's going to see it, and seam allowance is great. But when you're doing a cowl like this, where you're going to kind of see the inside and the outside at the same time, you don't want a lot of seam allowance. So all I'm going to do is go through and see there's like these little knots on the edge because you have sort of a garter stitch selvage here. And so I'm just going to go through that knot, and then I'm going to go over on this side and see, oh, there's an edge. So I'm just going to pick up the very edge of each stitch. And you don't want to, like, I wouldn't want to pull there because all I'm going to do is get a big hole. So I want to pull on something that's going to anchor it and it's going to hold it. And you can see it's more of an art than a science. You just kind of experiment, putting your needle in someplace. And you'll see that really no matter where you go in, it's not gonna, it doesn't show that much. And it's not gonna have a lot of stress pulled on it. So if you were, once again, making a sleeve seam or some seam that's gonna be, you know, maybe pulled apart, that would, you know, you'd see a lot of gaps. But because this is just going to, you just want it to lay nice and flat, you're not really going to see anything. So it really, give yourself some some space to experiment and just kind of stick your needle in, see what happens, try and get them lined up as nicely as possible, and then just keep going down. Either side, you're going to grab a stitch on one side and you're going to grab a stitch on the other, and as I said, I have the outside facing me, so I can always see, check in, see how it looks. So I would take this down as far as maybe a couple stitches farther so that I have some tail to weave in. But then I'm going to start at the other end. And I'm going to thread this tail. And I'm just going to work the other way. So I'm going to join this to where my stitch marker is in there, so I can get as straight as I can. And this, I am going to go back and forth a couple times and just anchor it, because if there's any stress, that's where it's going to be. And then I'm just going to do the same thing. As you're going along, you want to kind of tug at it a little bit. Make sure that you haven't gotten it cinched up, because that's pretty easy to do. And you want to make sure that it's going to lay as flat and flexible as possible. The other thing that you want to do every once in a while is look and see how your gap is going. So this is the part that I haven't done yet. This was the part that I worked from that way down. And so far it's looking pretty even. If it looked like it was going to be, that I was going to end up with a bubble, you want to address that as quickly as possible. It does look like there's a little more fabric here than on this side. So I'm going to take a little longer stitches on this side and a little shorter stitches on that side. So I'll go up a little higher and then a little lower, and that will ease the extra fabric. And now this is where I ended this, but it's still going to give me a hole, and I do want to kind of reinforce that edge. So I'm going to go past, pull it out, and there we have it. So all I have to do is weave in my ends,